Hey everyone, AquaTwist here, and welcome back to UI Spy, the series where I analyze the UI of video games. For over 25 years, Super Smash Bros. Has been a core pillar of Nintendo. It's also my favorite fighting game franchise of all time, where I've put in over 1,000 hours across all of the entries. Smash is my go-to multiplayer game, where regardless of who I hang out with, they're usually up to play it. Smash has remained an iconic staple in gaming, releasing on every Nintendo console since its inception. Its roster of classic Nintendo and third-party characters, combined with its accessible control scheme, broadened the appeal of fighting games to a wider audience. Even as a kid, I was always fascinated by the menu design of these games, before I knew about Persona's existence. The distinct shapes, vibrant character select screens, and flashy effects have ingrained these menus into my memory. An important note about these menus is that most of them weren't made by Masahiro Sakurai. To my knowledge, they are actually created by his wife, Michiko Sakurai, so she deserves credit for creating these iconic menus. Although YouTubers such as Relax covered these menu designs before, I wanted to spend more time analyzing the UI design itself. A lot of tiny details and context surrounding the time these games were released in may have been glossed over, so I wanted to talk about these from a graphic design perspective. Regardless of where the series goes in the future, I wanted to look back at the legacy Sakurai has given us over 25 years later. With that said, let's start from the very beginning. Super Smash Bros. First released on the Nintendo 64 in 1999. From the start, Smash 64's menu was a clear departure from traditional fighting games at the time. The background design appears to have a street punk influence, with the game's title and developer, HAL Laboratories, repeated in the background, using different fonts and colors. There's also some hip-hop influence in the color scheme and layout, being similar to games like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Other games have used the repetition but in different ways motif, such as the pre-boss battle screens in No More Heroes. Albeit basic, the bright red header text contrasts against the muddied, dark background, allowing players to focus on the options available to them. This design technique continues into the subsequent menus, such as selecting 1P mode. Even today, on an HD TV, the simplistic color palette of the menu buttons are nice and easy to read. Just simple gray buttons with black font, and highlighted options in red. A lot of N64 games from this time period struggled with this, as they were designed with CRTs in mind, and the scan lines could blur the scrunchy fonts or gradients. The menu options feature materialistic iconography, which is refreshing to see after the thousands of simple icons we're used to seeing nowadays. These more detailed vectors complement the modes perfectly, so even for multiple languages, you can easily understand what they are for. One controller for 1P mode, the console with 4 plugged in for versus mode, a volume slider for options, and a journal for settings. The layout of these buttons creates a symmetrical divider between the blue mode select font and the blue Smash Ball logo on the bottom right. Once you open up versus mode and see the character select screen, BAM! Your eyes are greeted with colorful portraits in a kick-ass track that hypes you up for a fight. The music alone is iconic enough to remain with the series to this day, being used in the results screen in Smash 4 and Ultimate. The character portraits ooze that 90s cartoony charm, featuring highly saturated, plasticky models. The brown background has this photorealistic gravel texture, similar to those found on other N64 titles, especially Super Mario 64. It's the only game in the series to feature silhouettes for unlockable characters, with question marks over them. There's animated TV static over each icon, instead of a boring, flat shape. It adds to the intrigue and mystery which players would have had at the time, being excited to see who these fighters truly were. It's impossible to implement this in a modern fighting game in the age of the internet, where the element of surprise can be ruined in mere seconds. Smash 64 is also the only entry where you can see full 3D models of the character you select. If modern fighting games like Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 can do this, why couldn't Smash do this again? It can influence a player's choice with who they want to pick, depending on the animation. If the Switch version of Guilty Gear Strive can do this, albeit with a smaller roster, then there's no reason that Smash can't. For the character slots where no one has been selected, there's a locked vault door with the Smash logo on it. And when that controller port opens up, the doors open too. The character select screen catches your eye, like how arcade track screens were from this era. It makes me wonder what a Smash arcade machine would have looked like if it released back at this time. Overall, Smash 64's menus still hold up incredibly well today. The black and gray color palette matches that of the N64 console itself. It has this underground feel to represent the new kid on the fighting game block, and it wouldn't take long until it stood alongside them. Just 2 years after its debut title, Super Smash Bros. Melee released for the GameCube in 2001. These menus featured grid-based backgrounds, similar to the one used in the character select screen from Marvel vs. Capcom 2 a year prior. The curved grid shape is nearly identical too, but the grid covers the entire background, and the individual cells are smaller. I wonder if Sakurai was inspired by MVC2 when creating this menu, or if it was a coincidence. The dark navy blue background contrasts with bright gold UI buttons and black lettering, making the buttons easily readable on screen. The background also uses a bunch of rectangles and trail lines throughout, reminding me of the main menu of the PlayStation 2. Through its darker palette and restricted usage of colors, we can see Nintendo wanted to appeal to older audiences with Melee. Melee was rated teen in the US, whereas Smash 64 was rated E. The GameCube is part of Nintendo's edgy era, as depicted in their old advertisements, pushing for M-rated titles including Geist and Eternal Darkness. Whenever you're selecting a game mode, there's a description of the one your cursor hovers over. It's an excellent addition, helping inexperienced and casual players understand the different options and gameplay modes, so much so that it would continue to be used for the rest of the series. There's a tiny panel to the side of the modes. It shows you a preview of the next list of options which will appear when you select that mode, titled Next Screen. It's placed further in the background to the player's eye, due to the smaller size. The smart design choice minimizes the amount of times you have to select a mode and back out to figure out the one you want to play. The menu buttons are set at an angle, unlike the straight circles of Smash 64. This extra level of dimension makes Melee's menu more dynamic. There appears to be a mechanical design, with a sharp edge on the left and hook on the right. It adds to the overall Y2K aesthetic Melee's menu goes for. It fits perfectly alongside other menu design from early 2000s media. The file folder borders especially make players feel like they're interacting with a futuristic computer terminal. The border colors change depending on which type of modes you're interacting with. Red for versus, purple for data, and yellow for options. It's subtle and doesn't break from the aesthetic theme. The original Xbox menu, also released in 2001, used similar design techniques, with the grid backgrounds using a limited palette of a muted color and skeuomorphic buttons. It's a unique style which no other Smash game, and few Nintendo games for that matter, have replicated since, making it a product of its time. The character select is iconic, setting the standard found throughout the rest of the series. Names are displayed in the bottom in an easily readable black box with white text. Each portrait is crisp and clear, compared to the pixelated renders of Smash 64. However, the silhouettes of unlockable characters are gone, just using standard slots with question marks over them. It's also the last time we'd see slots reserved for unlockable characters in the series. The visual hierarchy is better balanced than in Smash 64, shrinking the character portraits in exchange for larger player slots. A greater emphasis is placed on the selected characters, allowing for more character slots to be added. The character portraits are zoomed out too, allowing players to easily distinguish between them with their unique, dynamic poses. The warm gray headers transitions nicely from the main menu, and incorporates the navy blues into the background. It continues the Y2K computer OS aesthetic with the symmetrical borders on the top and bottom of the screen. Melee was the first Smash game which allowed players to change their default player tag to a 4-digit phrase. This allowed for casual spectators to answer the age-old question of, "Which one are you?" It's an incredible innovation which we take for granted while playing fighting games online today, being able to see your opponent's gamertag during matches. Looking back, it's mind-blowing seeing the step up from the Nintendo 64 to the GameCube, especially the increased graphical capabilities of the console. Just 2 years later, and we've jumped to more complex menu designs featuring dynamic backgrounds and a stronger aesthetic theming. Even for a game released in the first year of the GameCube's life, Melee features one of the best menus of the entire console. It's no wonder then that Melee was the best-selling game on the console and will remain a timeless classic. It would take 7 years for Super Smash Bros. Brawl to release on the Nintendo Wii in 2008. Brawl features the iconic pie slice menu design, which is associated with games made by Masahiro and Michiko Sakurai. However, it was not the first game which began this trend. That honor belongs to Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube, which came out only 2 years after Melee. Although Brawl's buttons more closely resemble those of Meteos on the Nintendo DS, which Michiko also designed the UI for. In both titles, the core menu buttons are now color-coded, distinguishing the different game modes from each other. But I would argue it works better in Brawl's case, as the brighter background makes the buttons pop out more on screen. The X being used for group instead of using multiple characters, like how we typically portray multiple players, is genius, as the 4 corners of the letter represent a different player, all coming together in the middle of the X as a unified group. It helps more casual players find the modes they want to go to. Do you have multiple players? Go to group. Or is it just you? Then go to solo. Where can I play online and see the slideshows everyone keeps talking about? Nintendo WFC. This design choice was most likely made to appeal to the broader, casual audience of the Wii. Ironic because Brawl uses a more washed, realistic art style for its characters, unlike the colorful, cartoony ones found in the later games. Brawl is also the final time you could rotate the menu around in 3D space using the right analog stick or C stick. Although unnecessary, it was a cute feature which was fun to mess around with. It gave the menu an extra dimension which is rarely found within UI today. The pastel light green background is the direct opposite of Melee's grays, purples, and blues. Perhaps this signified the shift in the game's target demographic from the edgy GameCube era to the relaxed Wii era. The orientation and size of the circles in the background appear to represent a game controller. I never noticed this until working on this video, but I wonder if it's intentional or not. Regardless, it gives the menu a computer OS vibe again, especially with the use of Squidward green. This aesthetic can also be found on the angled borders on the top and bottom of the screen, featuring white scan lines. Going into the character select, we see some new additions. Character names fully fit within their borders now, instead of being abbreviated, like Captain Falcon was in Melee and Smash 64, even if they have to be squished like Zero Suit Samus. Player tags were increased to a maximum of 5 characters instead of 4. Each column organizes characters by their respective series: Mario, Zelda, Kirby, etc. Grid icons are nicely lined up with each other, instead of being crooked, which Melee is infamous for. The background character of the character slots is identical to the ones used on the Smash Bros. Dojo. For those who don't remember, the dojo was the official website used for Brawl's pre-release marketing. Masahiro Sakurai himself posted new information about the game every day before it was released. It's nice to see the marketing material being reused in the final product. But the bigger quality of life change was being able to quickly change the rules by hovering the cursor on the button up top, instead of having to go into a separate rules menu. With the wider casual audience Brawl appeal towards, this encourages players to easily swap between different rule sets, be it timed, stock, or coin. Anyone else want to see that come back, or is it just me? When using a Wii remote, its speakers would play a voice clip when a player selects their character. The sound quality is so bad, yet so charming at the same time. Even today, dozens of memes have been made with fake characters being added to Brawl, and what their Wii remote voice clips would sound like. It's a fun feature that represents the quirky, casual appealing Nintendo, which was lost in the soulless Switch 1 era. Sound design itself plays a critical part in a positive user experience, and Smash is no exception. As previously mentioned, the bombastic announcers of the previous two games helped hype players up before every match.
Free for all!
But Brawl goes a step further by incorporating more sound effects for interacting with the UI. Every button hover, every click, every cancel, all interactions have sound effects that help reinforce the actions which players are doing. Providing them this extra level of feedback is especially helpful for a more casual audience who may be confused with what's happening on screen. But the excellent audio design isn't limited to the sound effects. The background music of Brawl's menu is orchestrated beautifully, elevating the menu experience. It sounds grandiose with the sense of finality, as if Brawl's the culmination of the juggernaut Smash has become. For millions of Nintendo fans, this is the definitive theme of Super Smash Bros. It can be argued that later titles don't come close to how iconic and memorable Brawl's menu music was. Just listening to the song on its own brings back memories of unlocking all the characters, playing with my friends, and beating Subspace Emissary for the first time. And for those who are tired of hearing it all the time, don't worry. You can change the menu theme by going into the My Music option in Settings. This is yet another feature Smash pioneered, which we take for granted today in modern fighting games. With these jukebox modes, the background music is no longer restricted to the stage or character themes assigned by the game. Menu themes can now also be easily changed as well. More and more fighting games have been adding this feature over the years, like Tekken 8 and Guilty Gear Strive. However, it's worth noting that Brawl only lets you adjust how often these songs play. It wasn't until Ultimate where you can choose the specific song you wanted to hear in the menus and during battles. As a celebration of Nintendo and gaming history, it's only fitting that Brawl expanded its audio library to include hundreds of new tracks. No longer are these restricted to their specific series being represented, but other franchises as well. Brawl more than tripled the song list of Melee, and was one of the largest music collaborations in gaming history at the time. 38 different people helped compose the entire soundtrack, across all the unique arrangements and original tracks. This marks Brawl as the turning point of Smash being a small Nintendo crossover to a gaming juggernaut, one which would only grow more with each subsequent entry. A key factor into Brawl's massive transformation was the introduction of the Chronicle, a list compiling the major first and third-party releases of every Nintendo system leading up to Brawl's release. While this appears to be a glorified Wikipedia page at first glance, it's far more than that. It's the beginning of Nintendo fully embracing their gaming legacy, alongside the Virtual Console on the Wii Shop channel, which released around the same time. Thanks to these two initiatives, a new generation of gamers grew up with learning about Nintendo's extensive gaming history, myself included. As players completed challenges and unlocked more content, they will be rewarded with expanding the Chronicle, incentivizing them to learn more about Nintendo's past. You could even play small demos of some of the most iconic titles through the masterpieces, some of which were also unlockables. As a result, Brawl was more than just a Smash Bros game, but an interactive museum of Nintendo's history. Crazy to think this released several years before proper game preservation efforts were easily accessible, such as the Gold Master series from Digital Eclipse. Alongside the series' representation and trophy descriptions, players are provided a wealth of information they otherwise never would have gotten, let alone in a single game. And if it weren't for their inclusion in Smash, dozens of franchises wouldn't see the same level of popularity as they would today, especially Fire Emblem, Earthbound, or Mother in Japan, and F-Zero, and this would only get better in later entries. Although it's not as universally acclaimed as Melee in the eyes of diehard Smash fans, Brawl pioneered several iconic design features used for the rest of Sakurai's projects. As the hype grew larger, so did the development challenges. How did the Sakurais continue their menu design style while developing not one, but two Smash games at the same time? Shortly after the release of Super Smash Bros. For 3DS, we got Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, on Nintendo's worst performing home console to date. I know, the names weren't the most creative in the world, but at a time where Nintendo's sales and reputation were rapidly declining, it made sense for them to choose the safer option. But the 4 was also clever, as millions of fans interpreted this as 4, as this was the 4th Super Smash Bros. Game. As with the majority of Smash 4, the Wii U menu is nearly identical to the 3DS version. A lot of the options feature the rounded pie shapes, but with sharper angles. The hierarchy of different elements is emphasized better here, as seen with Smash being the largest menu option, followed by Online, then Smash Tour. It's incredibly surprising seeing Smash Tour being a larger button than Games & More. Why is this a problem? For those who don't know, Smash Tour is a Mario Party style board game where you do multiple battles in a row. Placing this button directly underneath Online indicates that it's a core gameplay mode. It's even an entire unique selling point on the back of the box, advertised by the developers as something players should look forward to trying. However, the format does not bode well for the fast-paced, pick-up-and-play game flow Smash is known for. I respect the developers for trying a new gameplay concept, but it sadly doesn't work well. But what's worse is Games & More buries all other gameplay modes outside the core Smash Bros. Experience. It was especially frustrating in the Wii U version, as finding your preferred mode was more difficult, compared to the limited options of the 3DS version. The solo menu in Brawl was self-explanatory, containing all the single-player modes. What does Games & More even mean? The options are also buried here instead of being its own dedicated button. It doesn't qualify as just being part of Games & More, but a necessity in the menu. Not only that, but the vault from Brawl is lumped into Games & More too, requiring another menu to pass by just to access the trophies and the replays. Vault could have easily remained as a separate option on the main menu, to organize the different modes better. As Sakurai flexes having as many modes on screen as possible within his menus, it's surprising to see them be all disorganized here. A good rule of UX design is the 3 clicks rule, where the menu a user wants to access should be reached within 3 clicks or less. Unfortunately, if you count pressing a button on the title screen, this rule is broken when finding a specific mode in Games & More. On a more positive note, the background has animated silhouettes of the base roster, flying in and out of the screen. It's satisfying to watch this loop through, like the old Windows 7 screensavers were. The Wii U version has the edge over the boring white background on the 3DS version. The core versus mode was changed from Group to Smash, and is the largest button on the whole menu. This change more clearly indicates Smash matches can be played against CPUs, and aren't restricted to player versus player. So even those playing by themselves who want to mess around with some quick single-player Smash matches can easily do so. Challenges was promoted to being a core button on the main menu, instead of being inside of the vault, a nice incentive for completionists. But unlike its predecessors, Smash Wii U's menu doesn't follow a particular aesthetic theming, which is why the menu is arguably less memorable than previous titles. The restrictions set by the 3DS held the Wii U version back from reaching its full potential. Sakurai's insistence on making handheld and console play as similar as possible resulted in a safer, more limited menu. The trophies interface further exemplifies Smash 4's weak visual identity. The angled file folder design returns from Brawl, with the trophies represented series having a blue background. There's a nice white panel with black text framed by gray sidebars, and the light gray panel indicating which games the trophy came from. Yet the background of the trophy by default is a standard black with a thin blue gradient running across. It clearly divides the UI panel from the rest of the screen and stands out too much. Compare this menu to Brawl's default trophy screen. The navy blue background has a nice 1-point perspective grid on the bottom, reminding me of the main menu from Melee. The symmetrical borders on the top and bottom of the screen frame the content nicely, using the same shade of blue. Let's leave this mess of a menu and head over to the character select screen. There's a surprising amount of great changes which were made here. Character names are more easily readable, each fitting within one line, as opposed to the line breaking for longer character names. The names were put underneath the character portraits instead of on top, making them more easily visible. The higher saturation in the art style allows the different controller ports to be easily distinguished from each other. This was especially important as the Wii U version allowed for up to 8 players to be in a match simultaneously, requiring each slot to have different colors. These also have a small circle for the icon of a fighter's represented series. The higher contrast allows these iconic symbols to be more easily visible compared to Brawl's more muted colors. But that's where my praise ends. Unfortunately, the lack of theming also applies to the character select. Character portraits are less exciting this time around. Fighters still have distinct silhouettes, but many characters appear static compared to the dynamic poses of Melee and Ultimate. This reminds me of Mario's big sanitation during the Wii U and early Switch eras, where Nintendo would only depict the red plumber in the safest means possible. It wasn't until Super Mario Bros. Wonder in 2023 where Nintendo finally loosened their iron fist with highly expressive characters. If there is one design flaw to represent the identity crisis of Smash 4, these portraits take the cake. But how do these menus translate to a portable screen? Let's return to our handheld friend and find out. The design philosophy of the 3DS menu copies another game Sakurai developed, Kid Icarus Uprising. Although the colors are more saturated in Smash 3DS's menu, both feature thick dark outlines and large shapes which are perfect for viewing on the smaller screen of the 3DS. Although the menu is nearly identical to the Wii U, there are key differences I wanted to address here. The hierarchy of elements is decently balanced, with each button shape being around the same size, a necessity to accommodate the smaller screens of the 3DS, where menu elements need to be as large as possible. The Challenges mode in particular, where it's a rectangular button instead of being a pie slice. This was likely done to encourage players to complete more challenges as they play, as there's less available modes to complete. There's an additional button for Street Smash, a minigame where you have to knock your opponent's tokens off of a small board. It's a perfect utilization of Street Pass, as you battle against the people you've tagged who also own Smash 3DS. The touchscreen gives a full visual preview of the mode or modes within each menu button, taking advantage of the hardware. It also displays your 3DS username, battery icon, and time, all pulled from the system settings. Unique to Smash for 3DS, every character portrait on the select screen has their own colored background. Like in Brawl, this ties with the marketing strategy for Smash 4, where each character would be tied with their individual color. A nice way to help newer players identify these characters better. The two screens are nicely divided, with the roster on top and the rules and player slots on the bottom. However, the roster layout didn't leave space for adding in the DLC fighters. Unlike Smash Wii U or Ultimate, an extra fighters button was added to separate DLC fighters from the base roster. I get they likely didn't want to make the CSS more cramped on a tiny 3DS screen, but some players can forget these characters are available when not everyone is on the same screen. Regardless, both the character select and main menus are perfectly suited for the portable screens of the 3DS, and the weak aesthetic theming is forgiven here given the limitations of the platform. But overall, Smash for 3DS and Wii U are two sides of the same coin. While arguably a downgrade compared to their predecessors, Smash 4 was a step in the right direction for the franchise. The removal of tripping and faster gameplay speed put the competitive scene on the rise, and it was the dawn of the iconic hype age among the internet, as fans lost their minds over who got added to the roster. If it weren't for the efforts of Bandai Namco, Sakurai, and Nintendo, we wouldn't see the culmination of it all. That is to say, we wouldn't have the ultimate Super Smash Bros. Experience. Looking at the menu, the hierarchy of elements is more balanced than in Smash 4. Ultimate is the first entry since Brawl, where the pie-shaped buttons were axed in favor of rectangles cut off by a circle in the middle. The circle has an image inside, providing a visual preview of the mode you're hovering over. The background is just black filler space this time around, allowing you to easily focus on the main menu buttons. Each menu button has a different geometric texture to them, and aren't entirely flat colors. It's subtle, but different enough to distinguish at a quick glance, which can be useful for colorblind players. There is now a sidebar, allowing you to quickly access a set of options by pressing ZR or Z on GameCube. You can open the sidebar from nearly any menu, so you don't have to go back to the first screen constantly like in Smash 4. In fact, you can actually go back to the main menu with the press of a button. This quality of life feature was ahead of its time, and I'm surprised more games haven't implemented this yet. The layout of every submenu is nicely condensed this time around, especially games and more. The buttons in Ultimate are perfectly cut like puzzle pieces to form a nice semicircle shape, similar to what Goob and Balloons did for its menu. They curve nicely around the preview image on the left hand side. This also applies to the vault, returning to the main menu like in Brawl. Each button is color-coded to match the dominant color of the specific submenu. Red for Smash, blue for Games and More, green for Spirits, orange for Online, and pink for Vault. This prevents players from being confused about which menu they're currently on. Compared to Smash 4, menus don't blend together and are visually distinct. Many of the backgrounds use smooth gradients and tranquil animations, like bubbles and zooming lines. These remind me of Windows 7 screensavers and wallpapers, which feel more peaceful compared to the uninteresting ones of Windows 11. I'm surprised these backgrounds were designed this way, as around the time of Ultimate's development, 2016 to 2018, Nintendo started transitioning into minimalism for their UI designs. Super Mario Odyssey is a prime example of this, releasing during the launch year of the Switch. The HUD is devoid of all charm Mario games are typically known for, mainly using plain white text for their elements. Yet Ultimate doesn't follow these conventions, remaining true to Sakurai's iconic design features, such as thick outlines and saturated colors. But where Smash Ultimate falls flat within its menu design is the newly introduced Spirits mode. The iconic trophies dating all the way back to Melee were retired in favor of PNG images. Granted, I enjoyed the concept of Spirits. There are hundreds of spirit battles with unique gimmicks, making it a spiritual successor to the event mode of the previous games. But for having an entire menu button dedicated to them, Spirits could have gotten better justice. All 1500 spirits just display their image, name, and series they come from. The specific game and platforms are nowhere to be found. Who the heck is And-OK and why are they here? I understand the lack of descriptions and 3D models as the additional development needed on top of localizing all the extra writing, that wasn't worth it. But coming off of 2 entries which sparked interest in Nintendo history for millions of players with a whole encyclopedia's worth of info, it's a disservice. As much as I love Smash Ultimate and its gameplay improvements, the Spirits broke what I believe is one of Smash core values as a Nintendo franchise. Having all the info in one place was valuable, especially for younger players who couldn't have easily Googled this stuff up at the time. But with that aside, let's look at the character select. The design techniques used are surprisingly closer to Smash 4 than I originally thought. The background also uses a soothing, looping animation, this time a tropical slushy drink, with yellow and blue dual tones. However, if custom balance is turned on, the menu changes to pink, a nice visual indicator to indicate the settings have changed, as custom balance is a setting where you can adjust the power level of the fighters. Unlike previous Smash games, the roster is ordered by each fighter's Smash Bros. Appearance and not by their represented series. While confusing, this design choice makes sense, as this kept the order consistent even when DLC characters were added, unlike Smash 4, where DLC characters broke the roster order. You can also stack the Echo fighters on top of each other, reducing the total amount of slots on screen. Personally, I think it's easier to have all 90 characters easily visible. When a character is selected, you can pick the exact skin you want by clicking on their character portrait. The stock icons of all their skins are set in a nice row. You can still cycle through skins by pressing the X or Y or shoulder buttons like before, but this is a really awesome feature. Once all characters have been selected, the "Ready to Fight" immediately jumps out at the player's face, being more noticeable than the simple flat banner of Smash 4. I can see the Persona 5 influence here, a game which Masahiro Sakurai has gone on record saying he loves. The dynamic angle of the text, the rotated black square in front of the red banner, and white outline all feel like Sakurai took a page from Atlus's design portfolio itself. Unfortunately, this menu is far from perfect. Because of the weak processing power of the Switch 1, every fighter's colors load in individually. As a result, the further towards the bottom the character you select is, the longer it takes to load their different skins. This was incredibly tedious when I used to play tournaments for Ultimate all the time, especially when I had to wait to make sure my opponent and I were using the correct skins. No other Smash game had this problem before, and hopefully future entries won't have to worry about this again. But with my issues aside, it's crazy to see the buffet of content available, and seeing how Smash started from so little all these years ago. Over 25 years later, every Super Smash Bros. Menu remains an iconic part of Nintendo's history. From the grungy, outcast beginnings of Smash 64 to the colorful shapes used from Brawl onwards, these designs have been ingrained in our minds as much as the games themselves. Each of these menus are a time capsule of the design trends of the time period they released in. Hopefully the next generation of UI designers will be inspired by Masahiro and Michiko Sakurai's legacy when creating their own menu designs, for video games or otherwise. I'm excited to see what approach to UI design Sakurai will take in his future projects, like Kirby Air Riders. But anyways, that's all from me. Special thanks to Smash and Salmon for helping proofread this monster of a script. Be sure to like this video, share this video, and subscribe if you want to hear me talk more about game UI design. Thank you again for helping me reach over 2,000 subscribers. That is absolutely insane. When I originally reviewed this channel back in 2023, I never expected to see this much interest in the channel again, let alone this series. To see an area as niche as UI, something that I'm passionate about, see this much interest and support, really means a lot to me, and I couldn't have done it with viewers like you, so thank you. I believe we're finally at a point where we can really take off and move forward, and I'm excited to be continuing with more projects in the future. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your life is your own.
Objection!